Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. Here's something I bet you've been missing.
Come on, babe, why don't we paint the town? And all that jazz.
Chicago, the Broadway revival that has as much to say about sex, greed, and political corruption today as it did when it opened 24 years ago. Broadway needed razzle-dazzle back then, and Chicago supplied enough to light up the whole theater district.
Nightly brawl and all that jazz.
A new book, Singular Sensation, says Chicago, a rock opera called Rent, and plays like Angels in America transformed Broadway's in the 1990s. Author Michael Riedel, the longtime theater columnist of the New York Post, spins yarns that are insightful and delightful. He's next. Michael Riedel, good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you getting through all this?
I'm fine. I decamped to Florida, Sarasota. My parents have a house down here, and it was sitting empty. So I barreled through the pandemic since March of last year, but I thought I can't go through another winter without some sun and a run. And so I'm down here for the foreseeable future doing my radio show from down here.
Love that part of Florida, Longboat Key. Anyway,
I am.
Yeah, wonderful. The book, wonderful. Singular Sensation. The last line in the book, Michael, Broadway is in the midst of its new golden age, written, of course, just before the pandemic hit. My question is, what's on the other side of this pandemic, do you think? Do we resume the golden age, or can that happen?
It's not going to happen for a while, frankly. I mean, I finished this book, and this book is about, Singular Sensation, the triumph of Broadway. It's about Broadway in the 1990s, which was a very, very big decade for Broadway, where shows like Rent and The Lion King, Angels in America, Mel Brooks as the producers were as popular as any movie or TV show at the time. And I finished the book in February of 2020 and took myself on a little ski vacation to Switzerland and Italy. Then I got back and, a week later, all of Broadway shut down. And I thought, well, I'm writing this book that is about how big Broadway became in the 90s. And now Broadway was going to be closed, but we thought it was going to be closed for 2 weeks. Little did we know, we're going on a year now. It's probably going to be closed for another year and a half. Who knows? My book, I hope it's not out of date because it's a history book about the 90s. But I did write a foreword kind of putting things in perspective and dealing with COVID.
No way it's out of date, Michael. I didn't mean to suggest that. If you can look past this crisis, how bad do you think it is for Broadway? I mean, as well as I do that Broadway, the plasma of Broadway is tourists. Yeah. The plasma of the whole city is tourists. Are the tourists going to come back? Are they going to want to pay Broadway prices?
But my sense right now is you cannot reopen Broadway with ticket prices that are $800, $1,000 to see Hamilton. You can't just say, hey, we're open for business again. And all of you people who've lost jobs, who've lost income, you got to pay these obscenely high prices that Broadway was charging before the pandemic. So I think when Broadway reopens, it has to reopen with an entirely reconfigured economic structure where the ticket price for Hamilton is not $1,000, but it's $175, $200. But as you know, Tony, that requires great sacrifices on the part of the unions, the stagehands, the ushers, the producers, the theater owners. They all have to be in it together to reopen Broadway. And sad to say, already I'm hearing, there's a resistance. The unions don't want to take pay cuts.
Well, you say in the book, and part of your definition of the golden age and how big Broadway got in the 90s is, I think you use the phrase big business.
Yeah.
And you're talking about can they pare back that big business?
But Tony, if they don't do it, they're not going to survive. I mean, when you reopen Broadway, all right, you can reopen with The Lion King and Wicked and The Phantom of the Opera, these big shows that have been around a long time, but there are not going to be any tourists there. Tourists are not coming back to New York for a long time. New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. So people are going to be a little wary of traveling for a long time to come. The first people to go to the theater again are going to be New Yorkers. And you can't say to New Yorkers, hey, come see The Phantom of the Lion King. They saw it 30, 20 years ago. You got to offer them something new and exciting and different. I mean, if I were a Broadway theater owner or a producer, I would get Patti LuPone in Company, you know, the great Stephen Sondheim musical. Patti was about to open on Broadway before the pandemic shut it down. I would bring her back. That would bring New Yorkers back before they're going to go see The Phantom of the Opera. But you got to bring them back at a price that they can afford.
I had tickets for Company, and of course, waiting, hoping it does reopen. Let's get to your book and how you think the 90s changed or revitalized Broadway, and you start this sea change that you talk about with the musical Rent.
Yeah.
Talk about why.
Well, you know, in the 80s, Broadway was dominated by the Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh big spectacles. You had Cats, Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, and Miss Saigon. You know, big, expensive shows where everybody thought you have to have special effects, turntables, helicopters, falling chandeliers. And the last one of those shows, and that I opened the book with it, was Andrew Lloyd Webber's Sunset Boulevard, which is a good show, but it was wildly overproduced because Andrew produced it himself, and he felt that, you know, if you're going to charge people $75 to see a Broadway show, a lot of money back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Picky you now, but, you know, a lot of money back then. You know, he had a mansion for Norma Desmond that weighed two tons, I think. And it was overwrought. It was overdone. And the whole thing imploded on itself. And what was happening, and we did not know this, we who covered theater back then, was there was this little kid called Jonathan Larson. He wasn't so little, actually. He was 35 years old. And he loved the musical theater, but he felt that the musical theater did not speak to his generation. You know, generation that grew up on Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen. It was just remote. It was inaccessible to him. And he wanted to write a musical that was about what he was experiencing, living with. And he was in New York in the 80s and the 90s.
Struggling.
And, yeah, he was struggling and his friends were struggling. And some of them were gay or drug addicts. They were dying of AIDS. You know, there was no cocktail back then, as you know, to cure people who had AIDS and dying. And also gentrification was beginning to happen. So someone like Jonathan Larson was living in a walk-up apartment, but they wanted to raise the rent because, you know, you could put a Mark Jeffries there, you know, some handbag company could go into your building, get rid of the riffraff. And Jonathan wrote this musical called Rent. And at the same time that Andrew Lloyd Webber won the Tony Award for Sunset Boulevard, 1995, I think it was, Jonathan Larson is, you know, in his walk-up apartment down in, it wasn't even called Tribeca back then, but
was it the East Village?
No. Now, he did not live that was a myth. He wrote about the East Village in Rent, but he did not live in the East Village. He lived just south of the West Village, near the West Side. In fact, I've been to his apartment. When I was writing this book, you know, when you're writing a book, you want to really kind of absorb yourself in things. So I found his apartment. It's 408 Greenwich Street.
Yeah.
And I rang number 4, and I rang the buzzer, and this person answered it. And I said, "Look, you don't know me, but I'm writing a book, and there's a guy who lived in your apartment. Do you mind if I come up?" So this nice couple let me up, and I said, "Do you know who lived in this apartment?" And they were like, "No." I said, "The man who wrote Rent." And they were like, "Are you kidding me? We loved Rent. We loved Rent." They said, "He lived here. He lived in this apartment." And now the apartment was not like when Jonathan Larson lived. I mean, the bathtub was in the kitchen when Jonathan Larson lived there. It's now been souped up because everything in New York. But the point is that, you know, Jonathan Larson was writing a musical that would be young. It would be contemporary. It would be about what is happening in New York City right now. And the tragedy of all of that is he did not live to see how he changed the musical theater.
Yeah.
Because
a heart condition that was not diagnosed, missed, like 2 hospitals.
Well, he on the eve of his opening, his first preview at the New York Theater Workshop, because Rent started off Broadway, he'd not been feeling well, and they diagnosed him in the two hospitals with food poisoning or the flu. And it was this weird syndrome he had called Marfan syndrome that made a weak vessel in his heart. And that was killing him, and nobody knew it. And, it's very sad when I tried to recreate those last moments of his life. He was very excited because the New York Times was doing a funny thing about this. The New York Times was not writing about Jonathan Larson because they didn't know who he was. They actually were doing Anthony Tommasini, who was the opera critic. He was doing a piece on the centennial of La Boheme. And Rent,
what Rent is
based on Puccini's La Boheme. Yeah. And so Anthony Tommasini was going to sort of thread this little interview with this little kid into his piece on Puccini's La Boheme. And the last thing that Jonathan Larson did, the last person he saw in his life, he was being interviewed by Anthony Tommasini at the New York Theater Workshop. And he was thrilled because he grew up reading the New York Times, and then he rode his bike home, wasn't feeling well, put his tea kettle on, and dropped dead of that aneurysm in his kitchen floor, and was found by his roommate around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Never lived to see that Rent changed everything. It was the end of the Andrew Lloyd Webber era, and the Americans were back in business, and suddenly musicals became not something for your grandmother, but something that young people wanted to see, because Jonathan Larson wrote about young people.
It hit Broadway like a tsunami, and as you say, a lot of people didn't understand it, including our friend Manny Eisenberg,
who produced it.
Who produced it, but took advice from his niece or daughter, one of the young people. And you quote Brantley in your book, his review, saying, people who complain about the demise of the American musical have been looking in the wrong places. And it runs for 12 years?
15. Yeah, I think 15 years on Broadway. And the important thing about Rent to understand, Tony, is that the generation of musical theater writers now, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Bobby Lopez, Pasek and Paul, all of those people went to the musical theater because they saw Rent as teenagers. They fell in love with Rent. And Rent was suddenly the musical theater is relevant to someone who's 14, 15, 16 years old living in New York City. So Rent has a profound influence on Broadway as we know it today.
And you mentioned other shows a little while ago having a profound influence roughly at the same time coming to Broadway. You mentioned Chicago, you mentioned Angels in America, Guys and Dolls, The Lion King. Michael, just talk a little bit about Chicago's role in this change in the 90s.
Well, as I was saying, Rent was contemporary in a way Broadway had not been before. So Chicago, which was a musical in 1975, directed by Bob Fosse, and it was overwhelmed by A Chorus Line. They opened the same season, and The Chorus Line, as you know, Tony, became the sensation. So Encores, this wonderful concert series of old forgotten musicals at City Center, they did a 4-performance run of Chicago. And my friend Walter Bobby directed it. And they thought 4 performances, that's it. Well, Chicago, the very first performance of it at City Center, the audience went nuts for it.
Yeah, I remember.
They'd not heard those John Kander, Fred Ebb songs in a long, long time.
Well, I saw it originally. I saw the 75 version. I saw Jerry Orbach, who later became a friend in the final years of his life. And by the way, who hated the revival. Because, as you point out in the book, they took basically the concerts performance, which is a concert, and brought it to Broadway as a concert. And people, said, come on, they can't do this. Yeah. And as you point out so well in the book, yeah, you can do this. The people
well, the thing that made Chicago work, though, was, again, just as Rent is contemporary, Chicago, a 20-year-old show, is contemporary again, because what's it about? Okay, it's about the cynical point of view of the justice system. You can fool a jury by giving them the old razzle dazzle. So what's going on right at the time of Chicago at Encores? The O.J. Simpson trial. If the gloves don't fit, you must acquit. Chicago was ripped from the headlines of the O.J. Simpson trial. So all of a sudden, it had a kind of relevancy it never really had in 1975. Because in 1975 is what a throwback to the vaudeville. Fosse was giving his tip of the hat to vaudeville back then. But all of a sudden, here's the woman, she's guilty, but Billy Flynn's going to get her off with the old razzle dazzle. So that confluence of a great show, no question, it's a great show. And John Kander and Fred Ebb scores is wonderful. Nowadays, all that jazz, great song.
Class. I love Class.
But it was about
which, by the way, they left out of the movie. And I don't even want to discuss the movie because I thought it was garbage. And especially because they left the song Class.
Right. But again, it was like, as I try to point out in the book, Broadway in the 90s is becoming more relevant to what's going on in the world. It's not this remote thing that you only go to see in New York City when you're there. Chicago, Rent, these are shows that explode beyond Broadway. They become part of the mainstream of American popular culture again.
Well, talking about Broadway at the time, as you saw it, becoming relevant and talk about what's going on. I mean, it's hard to think of a more relevant piece of theater than Angels in America. A play about a very dark subject that took over.
Yeah, no, Tony Kushner, brilliantly trying to mirror AIDS with the politics of the time. And he writes this epic play about Roy Cohn in Ronald Reagan's America in the 1980s. And again, Angels in America becomes a play that is not just for New Yorkers. Angels in America was on the cover, I think, of Time magazine, if I'm not mistaken. But it just became, it elevated Broadway to, because it was a play, a kind of an intellectual discussion. It was talked about in all the great intellectual circles of America. And it just, again, shows you that in the 90s, Broadway ceased to be this kind of backwater place of the entertainment business, but became front and center in the entertainment culture. And Angels in America definitely put it there, no question about it. I mean, Tony Kushner was grappling with the politics and the disease. Funny thing about this pandemic now, as I think back on the 90s on Broadway went through a pandemic before, and that was AIDS, when no one was paying attention to all those sad young gay men who died of AIDS back then. And most of America wasn't paying attention. So Broadway knows how to get through a pandemic because so many of its people were killed before the coronavirus, the AIDS virus.
This time, though, it spread wider. I mean, it's the economy as well as the people who are suffering. I mean, you don't have the people suffering in the AIDS crisis. You go to Times Square today, we go down to that part of New York, it's a ghost town.
I know.
There's nobody around. I go down there once a week at least, because the West Bank Cafe and its owner is a good friend of mine. And it's sad. It almost brings tears to your eyes that to look around at Times Square and Hell's Kitchen and that whole part of it, and there's nobody around.
It's funny. When this hit in March and they closed things down, and I remember thinking it'll be 2 weeks and we'll be back in business. And, here we are a year later and we're not back in business. But my good friend, Imogen Lloyd Webber, who lives here in New York, and she's the daughter of Andrew Lloyd Webber, of course, wrote Cats and Phantom of the Opera and Evita. Around, I guess, May, when it was getting warm and we were still locked down, and I said, Imogen, we gotta get out of here. We gotta meet. So I said, she lives on the east side and I live on the West Village, in the West Village. I said, I'm gonna ride my bike up, you walk over, and let's meet in Schubert Alley and have a cocktail. Mm. And, the wine store was open. So I bought a bottle of rosé. This was in May. And we sat under the marquee of the Phantom of the Opera and we shared a bottle of rosé. And we were the only people in the neighborhood. Nobody else was there. Yeah. There was no one there. But Hero, who was he was a security man for the Schubert organization that owns so many Broadway theaters. He was the only person just walking around, making sure no one was breaking into the theater. And it was just Imogen and me under her dad's marquee of Phantom of the Opera, sharing a glass of rosé. And we just looked around and said, can you believe where we are now? I mean, this used to be the place that was teeming with people going to see all those shows. And it was totally dead. It was sad.
We started, Michael, talking about this subject and what we perceive is on the other side of this killer pandemic. And you made the point about Broadway can't come back the way it was with those ticket prices. But, I mean, Broadway theaters are not the most spacious. They're huge. You get 1,000 seat, 1,200 seat, 1,500 seat, but the seats are close together.
And they're old.
And my rear end has trouble even fitting into one of those seats. I mean, even if New Yorkers, as you suggested, are going to come back first, are they going to want to sit in a seat next to somebody else or have somebody else? I mean, are they going to have to space out the seating as they're doing on planes and things like that? And again, cutting into the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I am a little pessimistic on this front. And, I don't think that you get the vaccine and everyone's going to be like, oh, throw the masks off, we'll be together again. What we've all gone through for the last year is going to make us wary. It's going to make us wary of being so close to people again, because, we don't know what other viruses might come our way. We just don't know. I mean, the world is so interconnected with travel now that a new virus can spread like that. Frankly, as somebody's been going to the theater for many, many years, I would be a little reluctant to be packed into an old Broadway theater with 1,500 people, even with masks on. I'm going to be a little wary. I'm 54. My parents, my dad's 90, my mom's 80. I don't think they're going to rush to see a Broadway show anytime soon. And I think the Broadway producers and the theater owners have to understand that if you really want to bring people back, you have to offer them something fresh, something exciting, something new at a reasonable price. And that's the only way you're going to entice New Yorkers, who are going to be the bravest people, to get back to the theater for the first time. So you could not come up with if you were an evil person and you wanted to destroy the theater or the orchestras or the symphony, the Met, you could not come up with a more diabolical virus. I mean, a place where you spread it by singing, you spread it by sitting close to people, you spread it in the orchestra pit by people blowing on things. I mean, this is a recipe to kill the live arts in New York City. And it's going to take a long time for them to come back and for the audience to feel safe to come back. That's not going to happen overnight. We're not talking like, September, the lights of Broadway are lit again and we're all back together again. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how would you feel about going back to, even after you're vaccinated, would you be comfortable sitting by jowl with 1,500 people?
I miss the theater so much, and I go very often. I mean, I've seen Chicago, I've seen that revival, I don't know, 3 or 4 times when before all this, when friends out of town coming to New York, Tony, what should I see? We want to go to see Chicago. You'll if you can get a ticket to Hamilton, fine. If you can see the Lion King, fine. Whatever. See Chicago. I mean, you made the point before. It was ripped out of the headlines at the time it came on, 96. It's still ripped out of the headlines. It's cynical about greed, sex, corruption, bribes. It's all in there. I mean, they're geniuses, Kander and Ed. It's magnificent. So is your book, Singular Sensation, The Triumph of Broadway. Michael, I hope you're starting. Have you at least started on this third book?
Not yet, because this third book this Singular Sensation ends on September 11th, really, because I built Broadway up in the 90s, and then we had that horrific attack on the World Trade Center. And I called my friend Jerry Schoenfeld, who was the chairman of the board of the Shubert Organization then. I said, Jerry, what do you hear? What's going on? I said, Michael, we don't know. We've been told that there were bombs planted in Times Square, so we're shutting down Broadway. They were concerned that terrorists were in the city who, if you opened a Broadway show, would take over the theater and hold people hostage, as they'd done in Russia. If you remember that, there was that theater in Moscow where they took over the theater and they killed 75 people or something there. And 2 days, Tony, after the attack on the World Trade Center, September 13th, 2001, I went to the Producers, which was then the biggest show in town. I went
Right.
with Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft, and we watched from the back of the house, and 600 people came. I mean, you couldn't get a ticket back then, but it was 2 days after the attack, so about 600 people showed up. And at the very end, Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane, playing Leo Bloom and Max Bialystock, they led all of us at the curtain call singing God Bless America in tears. And as I was putting this book together, I thought, that's a great ending for a book. The arts are so crucial to a survival of a city. Without Broadway, New York is diminished.
New York is not New York.
It's not New York.
No.
It's not New York. And Broadway has been there, and it's survived the Depression, and it survived the movies, and it survived television, and it survived the financial crisis in the 70s, and it survived September 11th. And I believe it will survive COVID-19. But this is the most challenging one it's ever faced before, and we will see how it comes back.
And when you write about this period in the next book, call me. Let's get together again and do this again. And I hope it's not that long before we see each other again. But certainly when the book is coming out, I want to see you again, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to see you.
Take care, Tony. Thanks a lot.
You
Appreciate it.
take care too. And you folks, we will see you next week. Thank you.